So the king and Haman came to Esther's second banquet. Again, during the wine course, the king asked her, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? What do you wish? Whatever it is, I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom."
Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we have been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage.
"What are you talking about?" the king demanded. "Who would dare touch you?" Esther replied, "This wicked man Haman is our enemy." Haman had originally looked forward to this event. Suddenly, it became the worst banquet of his life. He turned pale with fright before the king and queen. What are the odds of that? Here he wanted to destroy all the Jews, and the queen just happens to be one of them. The king jumped to his feet and went out into the private garden as Haman stood up to plead for his life, for he knew he was doomed. The Bible doesn't tell us what the king did in the palace garden. Did he blow off steam? Gather his thoughts? Or perhaps he was brooding over the fact that he had made such a terrible choice in picking a second in command. In despair, Haman fell upon the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king returned from the palace garden. Oh, what lousy timing! This was a lot for the king to absorb. First he finds out that Haman wants to kill his wife. Now he thinks he's making a pass at her.
And Haman was fallen upon the couch whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he even force the queen before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then said Harbona, one of the chamberlains that were before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman hath made for Mordecai, who spake good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. And the king said, Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified.
Psalm 7 tells us that the wicked man makes a pit and then falls into the very ditch he has made. One of the Old Testament's most ruthless villains got his comeuppance in a highly ironic way. On that same day, the king gave the estate of Haman to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king that he was her cousin and foster father. The king took off his ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, appointing him prime minister, and Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's estate. It's a good thing that Haman didn't live to see that. Can you imagine how angry he'd be to know that the Jewish killjoy had just been given his job and his estate? Now there was just one more problem to solve: saving all the Jews in Persia from complete annihilation.
And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how shall I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people, or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?
Then the king said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, I have given Esther the palace of Haman, and he has been hanged upon the gallows because he tried to destroy you. Now go ahead and send a message to all the Jews, telling them whatever you want in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring so that it can never be reversed. You'd think the most powerful man in the world would just cancel the first edict. But in ancient Persia, once the king had put something into effect, it couldn't be stopped. This mighty king didn't have the power to cancel his own order. But he could issue a new decree to save the people of his lovely queen.
Then were the king's scribes called at that time, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback, riding on swift steeds that were used in the king's service.
This decree gave the Jews everywhere permission to unite in the defense of their lives and their families, to destroy all forces opposed to them, and to take their property. It also stated that a copy of this decree, which must be recognized everywhere as law, must be announced to all the people, so that the Jews would be ready and prepared to overcome their enemies. Who knows how many people were out there who hated the Jews just as much as Haman did, and wouldn't mind blotting them out and pocketing their loot.
So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad.
And in every city and province, as the king's decree arrived, the Jews were filled with joy, and had a great celebration and declared a holiday. And many people of the land pretended to be Jews, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. These people must have done their homework. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses had all been told by God that he would protect his people from their enemies. And everyone who had come against the Jews had made the worst mistake of their lives. On the appointed day, the Jews gathered in their cities throughout the king's provinces to defend themselves against any who might try to harm them. But no one tried, because they were greatly feared. And all the rulers of the provinces, the governors, officials, and aides, helped the Jews for fear of Mordecai.
For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went forth throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai waxed greater and greater, and the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and with slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto them that hated them. But on the spoil they laid not their hand. On that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is thy petition, and it shall be granted thee? Or what is thy request further, and it shall be done?
Then said Esther, If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according to this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand.
Meanwhile, the other Jews throughout the king's provinces had gathered together and stood for their lives, and destroyed all their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them. But they did not take their goods.
But the Jews that were in Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore do the Jews of the villages that dwell in the unwalled towns make the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to enjoin them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same, yearly, as the days wherein the Jews had rest from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to gladness, and from mourning into a good day.
So the Jews adopted Mordecai's suggestion and began this annual custom as a reminder of the time when Haman, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted to destroy them at the time determined by a throw of the dice, and to remind them that when the matter came before the king, he issued a decree causing Haman's plot to boomerang, and he and his sons were hanged on the gallows.
Wherefore they call these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed.
Queen Esther wrote a letter throwing her full support behind Mordecai's letter, inaugurating his annual Feast of Purim. In addition, letters were sent to all the Jews throughout the 127 provinces of the kingdom, with messages of goodwill and encouragement to confirm these 2 days annually as the Feast of Purim, decreed by both Mordecai and Queen Esther.
And as they had ordained for themselves and for their seed in the matter of the fastings and their cry. And the commandment of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land, and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.
The book of Esther has all the ingredients of a great story: clear-cut heroes and villains, excitement, adventure, intrigue, suspense, and a happy ending.